Hello, everybody. Welcome to our live stream on the truth about the Oklahoma City bombing. The link that I put there was to a series of James Corbett interviews, podcasts, and investigation that he did himself. A lot of the material also was related to a documentary called A Noble Lie, which is something we'll probably cover in the future. I understand if you were not able to get through all the material. It was 4 hours, and even working on it all week and having advance notice that I was going to do it myself, it was quite a lot to get through. So there are a lot of questions I have. I will try to pause as I'm asking some of those questions and look over into the chat. If I don't see questions, I will just keep going. Okay. As with 9/11, Oklahoma City has a number of questions that are unresolved. So, as I said before with 9/11, there's not necessarily a grand theory in which this person pushed this button and this happened. But what you can see through a tapestry of questions is that the official story is a lie. Once you accept that the government is lying to you, then you have to ask yourself, why is the government lying to me? Once you connect those two, then you're free to investigate this. But if you just accept the government story and you look at these questions and you ignore them because they conflict with the script that the government would never lie to me, then this stream is probably not for you. This stream is for people who are willing to ask questions about the official government story. So I'm going to ask a number of questions which don't have any good answers. The first one is, why was there no ATF in the building? The ATF offices in the Alfred Murrah building, they were told ahead of time not to go in. And there were people who said this. The ATF was told not to go to the building that day. Why were they told? Why did they not tell anyone else? They had foreknowledge of the event. Why did the Department of Justice get a call that the building had been bombed 24 minutes before it was bombed? Keep in mind, the building is April 19th, 1995 is when the building was bombed. It was bombed at 8:40 in the morning. So that means at 8:16 in the morning, the Department of Justice gets a call. Again, ask the question, if the Department of Justice gets this call, even if it's just silly, oh, we think it's a crank call. Hey, why don't you take a look outside? See, are there any suspicious objects outside? Yeah, there's a Ryder truck parked across the street. What could that be? Why did the Department of Justice get this? Because again, there was foreknowledge. The same way the BBC was reported ahead of time. Someone told them that the building was going to call. They got their time wrong, and they reported Building 7 had fallen 20 something minutes before it fell. This is an example of, in this conspiracy, that there were different buttons that were pushed, but some people pushed the button too early, i.e. tell the press, tell the media, tell the Department of Justice something happened, but they said it too early. So the same thing, the BBC were given the script, hey, Building 7 fell, but they were given the script too early, or Building 7 fell too late. But either way, there's foreknowledge there. So the Department of Justice gets a call that the building fell. Sorry, not the building fell. The building had been bombed 24 minutes before it was bombed. People who were in the building, survivors, say that they heard two blasts. One of them, in the first case, when they heard the first blast, they went under their desk. That's what all of us, at least in America, I can speak to. We're trained when there's some kind of explosion, earthquake, get under your desk. There's something to protect you if something falls on your head. So these people get under their desk and they hear another blast. The minute that there's a second blast, then you realize there's other bombs. And the documentary plays numerous news reports in which they said they found a second bomb. They're looking for a third bomb. Well, if there were bombs inside the building, that means it coordinated with the Ryder truck outside the building. But if you're able to blame the Ryder truck and say this truck bomb was able to demolish this part of the building, then there's no need to worry about the bombs inside, because then you'd have to ask, how did bombs get inside a federal building? The same way the bombs got inside the World Trade Center. They were placed there, they were wired, and they went off at a specific time, timed with the outside event. So in the case of the World Trade Center, you had planes going in. That was the event that looked like, oh, that's what triggered this. But really, there were bombs inside the building that helped bring it down. Same thing here, but this was much more closely coordinated, and we have witnesses reporting that they heard other bombs. So you have a truck bomb go off. At the same time, you have 4 columns, which have concrete just pulverized, decimated, and then this building falls down. And just, again, trust your eyes. Look at the building. Is that damage caused by a truck bomb? No, it's not. Because, again, it's outside of the building, so all you can have is this explosive force out. So it can cause, let's say, windows to smash, and even, let's say, part of the building that's closest to the bomb to have parts of it fall off, but you cannot collapse the whole building from the top. Again, classic overkill, as we saw with the World Trade Center. And if you think about this, this is 1995. This is not so far away from September 11th. So we have test runs happening. Why were the physics ignored? As I said, the kind of damage could not be done from a truck bomb from outside, but it could be done in coordination with a number of explosives and bombs inside, which were reported in the media. Again, you can go to the press and you can hear the reporting in the documentary. People said, we found a second bomb, we found a third bomb. You have witnesses saying that there were 2 blasts, and a seismographer was watching the seismic needles and saw 2 different events. And he was forced later on to retract his testimony because we can't possibly have 2 events. That means there were 2 bombs. If there are 2 bombs, that means there was a bomb in coordination with the outside bomb. And if there's a bomb, again, inside the building, it means there was coordination. Why was the ATF told not to go into the offices that morning? Why was there a bomb squad, Air Force bomb squad, ordered to come to Oklahoma, wait in a hotel room, and wait for orders? When this person was questioned, why were you here? The person said, you'll have to ask the FBI. Do you think the FBI are going to talk about it? There's also Terry Yakey, who I think was an Oklahoma City police officer who was decorated for the work he did. He was a hero that day, going in there, dragging people out of the rubble. But he found some things that day that haunted him. He wouldn't tell anybody about it. In fact, on the day before he died, a couple days before he died, he brought a VCR with a tape inside, threw it into his wife's car. She didn't know what it was about. And later on, that went missing. But that tape must have had something inside of it. Of Terry Yakey, this hero, again, Epstein was said he was suicide. He was suicided, as we say. Same thing that happened to the Boeing whistleblowers, suicided. The idea that he had rope burns, he had cut. I think he had cut himself either, I think, on the wrist or on the throat. He then came out to a field and then shot himself, but there's no murder weapon to be found, and there was no autopsy done. This makes no sense. And this was a man who was a hero, but was being told that he had to rewrite his police report because he probably had some inconvenient things in there. And his wife remembers him being told, you have to rewrite this report. It needs to be much shorter, probably needs to exclude a bunch of very devastating things. I haven't even talked about the fact that John Doe number 2 was never found. And in all likelihood, just as we saw with the so-called January the 6th uprising, which I call boomers taking selfies. And I've said this before, you might have heard me say this on the channel. I cannot take anyone seriously who refers to January the 6th as some kind of insurrection. In part because it means they don't understand how the US government works. You can take over any building you want in America. That doesn't put you in charge of the government. If you take over the White House in America, it doesn't mean you're now the president. If you take over Congress, it doesn't mean you get to start passing laws and you're now in charge of the bank account. So even if this were the case, that taking over a building in America somehow magically means that you run the country, we have all the video evidence now of people being led through the halls peacefully, taking boomers, as I say, boomers taking selfies by Capitol policemen. And we also find out now, because Trump is one of the few, Trump is being Trump, but we're finding out data that a lot of the people in January 6th were FBI informants. So what we're looking at for John Doe number 2 is a likely government informant, who was working together with Timothy McVeigh. And the reason why we are not talking about John Doe number 2 is because if we find out who this person is, then the trail leads back to the government being an instigator of this. And I'm going to get to why the government would do this later on. As I say, there's not a grand unified theory in which all the dots connect. What we're looking at is systematic questions which do not have clear answers. So what is clear is that there was foreknowledge. The ATF was told a truck bomb could not do this kind of damage. People who knew about it were suicided, even people who are loosely connected. Jesse Trinidou is a lawyer who's been doing work on Oklahoma City for many years because his brother, Kenneth Trinidou, probably in a case of mistaken identity, was picked up in Southern California on a parole violation and transferred to Oklahoma, which you don't do that normally. But if you have a parole officer in a parole situation in a local area, you don't get transferred somewhere else. Gets transferred to Oklahoma City, gets beaten, tortured, and is killed in police custody. And the government tries to get the body cremated. So we have the family is willing to testify that the government said, yes, we'd like to cremate the body. They said, no way. They finally do get the body. It's covered heavily in makeup, which happens for dead bodies. You put on some makeup for people to look a certain way in death. However, here the makeup was covering a bunch of beatings, bruisings. Even the soles of his feet were beaten, which you may not know is a serious torture technique. But Kenneth Trinidad likely mistaken identity for someone else connected to Oklahoma City. And again, you can go deeper there. As with the tapes outside of the Pentagon, we have missing tapes for the Ryder truck approach to the Murrah building. Now, you have to realize the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, I'm not very familiar with Oklahoma City. I suspect you may not be either. But the building is in downtown, which means you have to pass a bunch of buildings in your Ryder truck. A lot of those buildings have surveillance tapes. I found out there are 26 tapes. The 26 tapes, which have been subpoenaed and have been produced, all of them mysteriously, at the time in which the Ryder truck would have come into view, the tape is either blank or it says that, oh, the tape was being changed. Now, 26 tapes. Let's pretend, for example, it was possible of the 26, 6 of them at the exact moment that the Ryder truck is coming, someone is taking the videotape out and putting a new videotape in. I'll give you 6 of those. And then of the remaining 20, let's say 10 of them, had a little kid coming in there and demagnetized the tape and destroyed the tape. So 10 of those tapes gone. You still have 10 tapes that would show the Ryder truck approaching the Murrah building. And why is it crucial to make sure that that tape is not available? Because it shows that there's 2 people in the vehicle, Timothy McVeigh and somebody else. Who is that somebody else? It's John Doe number 2, who we heard about. I was young at the time, so I don't know. When I say I hear about it, I'm looking at the press recordings on the documentary in which they were saying, we're looking for John Doe number 2. Where is John Doe number 2? So we heard about him, and he disappeared. And this whole issue of the 26 tapes comes from the work of Jesse Trinidad, who is dedicated, I suppose, not only to find out the mystery of his brother's death, but he said on the record he wants to embarrass the government because the government thought they could get away with this, and he doesn't want them to get away with it. So he's been pursuing a particular theory with the FBI. In America, we have something called FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. And what it does is it should allow citizens access to key documents that don't compromise national security. That's always the asterisk that you can put. If anything compromises national security, that means it won't be released. That's always been the problem with JFK, RFK, MLK. All of those files have been stamped with national security problems, which is why we're never going to release them. So the FBI theory behind FOIA is that we have a legal responsibility to look for the documents you asked us for, but we don't have a legal responsibility to find them. So we can say, well, we looked for the files, but we didn't find them, i.e. they could lie. It's a very tendentious reading of the law that I'm obliged to look for the documents, but I'm not obliged to find them. It is a crazy theory, which totally creates some perverse spirit of the law alongside a very strange letter of the law. But in any case, this is the FBI's theory about FOIA, which Jesse Trinidad has been fighting all these years, and part of why, even when they produce tapes, they're clearly compromised tapes. That's why we have all of the videotapes around the Pentagon showing whatever it was that hit the Pentagon, likely a drone or some kind of missile, as opposed to a plane. And why are we not allowed to see the videotapes? If we saw the videotapes, then we could see it was a plane and all the conspiracy theories could be blown up. No pun intended. But this is something, and I'm trying to remember because we talked about this, I think, in last week's film club. Truth doesn't need defending. Lies need defending. Lies need protection. Lies need cover-ups. The truth doesn't need a cover-up. The truth doesn't need you to hide all the tapes from the Pentagon. The Truth doesn't need you to um, give us 26 tapes with a missing uh, period time lapse, especially when the Ryder truck is coming through. So, some interesting uh, little factoids, which also accompany. We have a filmmaker at Camp Grafton who captured a young man who was working inside a tank. So, I don't remember what the documentary was about, but the um, the person who went there was had a camera and went into the back of some military truck, and he saw the driver come out and says, "Oh, what are you doing?" And the person is surprised to be on camera, and he's only in frame for a little bit, but you can find it in the documentary. And the person's voice, when it was originally analyzed, and the face was Timothy McVeigh. Later on, the voice is examined by someone who is in voice forensics and who testifies for a living in court cases. And the person said he would be willing to testify in court under oath this was Timothy McVeigh's voice. The problem with this video shot at Camp Grafton is that it is a year and a half after Timothy McVeigh was discharged from the military, apparently. And what James Corbett does a good job of, the documentary, is explaining this concept of sheep dipping. Sheep dipping is making it appear that someone has left the military to the general public, to their friends, to their family, while then giving them a job within the military under Black Ops. If this sounds like something you've heard before, Jason Bourne is an example of this idea. Someone who's trained for particular cases, in this case, assassinations. And McVeigh, if he's in uniform at Camp Grafton a year and a half after he's been discharged, he cannot possibly have been properly discharged. And the whole story is a cover for McVeigh to be doing other things. McVeigh, to the end, is loyal. He doesn't squeal. But what he does do in his final months before going on to death row, not before going on to death row, before being executed, is he campaigns to not have an autopsy done on his body. Think that through. You're about to be executed. You're going to leave this life. And the main thing that you want to fight for is to not have an autopsy done of your body. Why would you do that? It makes no sense. It would only make sense if, and I think it was granted, you didn't want there to be an autopsy on the body because it may not be your body. Now, we've seen this in Romeo and Juliet, but we know the technology exists in order to take a drug such that your heart slows down to such a rate that you appear to be dead, but you're not actually dead. And we have McVeigh breathing slowly during the execution. An eyewitness says that even after he was pronounced dead, she saw the body breathing, although quite slowly. His ashes were presented to his family later. There was a decoy hearse. Oh, this is admitted by the government. They admitted there was a decoy hearse going after the execution. We don't know if that's Timothy McVeigh's ashes. And he campaigned for there not being an autopsy. And why would that be helpful? Because McVeigh fulfilled his job. He went down for a job which discredited the militia movement post Waco, post Ruby Ridge. And then it was set up that he was executed. He wasn't really executed, re-entered somewhere, maybe got plastic surgery, has disappeared, gone off the grid. But the point is that perhaps McVeigh was not actually executed. We don't have any hard evidence. It's the same thing with bin Laden. Oh yeah, we killed him and then we dumped his body at sea. Okay, remember that bin Laden was a CIA asset, and these sorts of, the fiction that we have in Zero Dark 30 about, the bin Laden story. Why does this matter? Because up until this time, the Counterterrorism Act of 1995 was languishing in committee. Now, for those of you who are not Americans, the way that bills get passed in the United States, and I'm going to try to be really, really simple about this, the bill has to pass both houses, and similar legislation has to be passed in both for there to be a unified law. Now, the way that bills go from origin to getting voted on is they go through committee, and the committees are in charge of different bills. So the Counterterrorism Act of 1995 was, I think the documentary uses a term, languishing in committee. What this means is there's not enough votes in the committee to move the bill out of committee, where you're marking up, you're proposing changes, you're deleting things, and then you take the changed version of that and you send it out to the floor for a vote, and it can be voted up or voted down. But you have to get out of committee, and sometimes bills just die in committee. In fact, the overwhelming amount of legislation dies in committee for whatever reason. It doesn't have enough people pushing for it. Like anything in life, you have to have enough people pushing for something in order for it to happen. This bill is languishing in committee. Everybody sits up. There was a bomb. We've got to have legislation. We get an anti-terrorism act, which is pushed by Joe Biden at the time, Senator Biden, back when he had a brain, back before he was a stuttering moron. And the anti-terrorism act becomes the kernel for the Patriot Act, which would pass after 9/11. So if we can trace back and say, well, why would the government allow a terrorist attack to happen on US soil? Well, it'd be so that we could pass legislation that would sell more weapons, allow more surveillance of the American people, curtail more freedoms, and make sure that we're in charge and make sure that you're scared. And if you're scared, you'll just do whatever we tell you. This didn't begin on 9/11, but we were prepped for it by something like Oklahoma City. The Patriot movement that was discredited within the FBI was referred to as PatCon, Patriot Conservative. And there was some link with neo-Nazis, and there were some other things. The person behind it, I'm trying to remember, who is the person behind this? Terry Nichols, that's different. There is a guy who's in charge of the FBI, but he was also in charge at the time of Waco and Ruby Ridge. But he was the person who was pushing this forward. He probably was the boss of McVeigh's handler. Again, going back to the Bourne Identity, there's someone who'd be in charge of the assassins. So in this case, McVeigh said that he reported to somebody called the Major, and this was the person who was in charge of him. All right. So I was just looking at all the questions I had. That's the questions. There's been a ton of stuff in the chat. Let me get back to that. There's a question there about something, but I won't read chats from with strange handles. The building was holding 250,000 medical records involved in a government investigation of the Gulf War syndrome, which was related to Cheney and Rumsfeld's vaccines for anthrax. That's interesting, Uncanny. The other thing that it held was records relating to investigation of the Clintons and the fact that Bill Clinton was using Arkansas airports as pathways for drug running for the cartels. Because, I mean, you want to talk about corruption, Bill Clinton is definitely one of them. It has been reported in the documentary, and I didn't talk about it because I just tried to limit the number of questions I had. There were 2 trucks that pulled up, and there were survivors under the rubble. Those people were not allowed to be rescued until files had been pulled from the building and put into these trucks. And apparently there were people running all around downtown picking up every piece of paper possible to make sure that these files were rescued. And when I say rescued, I mean taken away. You can say they were destroyed, same way that the records inside Building 7 were destroyed, quote unquote destroyed. If a building goes down, you're like, oh well, I guess we lost all those records. What a shame. Except you needed those records to disappear. So Uncanny, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, if you're having medical records that would involve an investigation, the Cheneys and the Rumsfelds of the world, of course those records need to disappear. It was the largest government class action lawsuit in history. What a coincidence, Uncanny. I'm sure it was just a coincidence. I'm sure there's no relationship. Have you heard of Flight 175 being replaced with a militarized plane armed with a depleted uranium warhead? I didn't hear depleted uranium warhead, but I do accept the possibility of all of the planes being replaced by drones that looked like the planes in outside appearance. So they could be if the reason why is because a drone can be more easily piloted and controlled, as opposed to these clowns who couldn't fly Cessnas, pulling off these amazing um, feats of aeronautic brilliance. They could just be remote controlled, much easier controlled, look like, to us, all appearances, a very large drone. So a depleted uranium warhead, that would explain the puncturing and it not being a missile. So interesting cruise and great point. Bin Laden died of kidney failure December 2001. Pakistani leader who revealed this was murdered in a bombing assassination. What a coincidence. Uncanny. Yeah, for me, everyone knows that Bin Laden, everyone knows. I shouldn't say that. Anyone who cares about the situation with Bin Laden knows that Bin Laden was a controlled CIA asset. Where he died, how he died, what seems to be most clear is he did not die in the way that was depicted in Zero Dark 30, which is the official conspiracy theory that we're supposed to believe. Damn, that would explain how the plane entered the building and came out the other end, the nose at least. I think, Uncanny, you're probably referring to Cruz's comment. Michael. Hello. Hello, Michael. Operation Vigilant Guardian involved 4 drone airliners, was carried out on 9/11. Yeah, coincidence that there was a military exercise happening on the same day, and that's why we get that famous audio. Is this real time or exercise? Real world. Is this real world or exercise? Laser designators were also recorded by VHF cameras on the day. Also, the Pentagon comptroller substituted for the day Rabbi Dov Zakheim, who controlled CPS, which rolled out remote hijack tech in the AA fleet in June 2001. Uncanny, thank you for the details. I don't know anything about that, but I appreciate you sharing that. Snowden worked for his other company, Booz Allen Hamilton. Clinton came back on the radar 2 days ago. Oh, yeah. How about Chelsea getting $84 million? Unbelievable. They also caught Israelis driving a truck bomb on the George Washington Bridge on 9/11. When arrested, they said, "We're not your problem. The Palestinians are your problem." Uncanny, you may have missed this, but we covered that in a live stream. Where I'm trying to think which it was. It feels very recent because I mentioned this, that, we're not your problem. The Palestinians are your problem. And it was the Dancing Israelis video that I did, I want to say 2 or 3 months ago, but this idea has kept coming up. What do the Palestinians have to do? Why are you bringing this up when you're talking with the FBI? Irish Potato. Hey, hello, Irish Potato. Operation Vigilant Guardian literally involved the same flight paths of the 4 airliners. What a coincidence, Uncanny. I'm sure it was just dumb luck. I don't know how, but that's how it happened. You can find info about hijack tech in a video called Air Hostess Whistleblower 9/11. I have it in my albums. Uncanny, if you have time either before the stream ends or after the stream ends, just put that in the comment section so that people who hear about it can find it more easily. It's always easier if people have a direct link that they can link to. Yeah, you said it was to distract from the 200 spies. Yep. Well, thank you all. There's a few people on the stream now. I'm glad. I'm going to put a shameless plug in for Palestine Bookshelf, which is going live in 2 or 3 minutes. We are going to be talking about an excellent 4-part documentary that Al Jazeera did on the Nakba. And it's simply just one of the best documentaries I've seen on the Nakba because it gives you the lead up going from 1880 coming up to 1948, but it does it with testimony and history and maps to show you how we get to 1948. And it covers so much information. And I was thinking to myself, I had to read 40 books across different parts of the Nakba to get what this documentary gets. So I almost just tell people, hey, just watch this 4-part documentary and you're going to get a really good sense of 1948. So shameless plug. I'm going to be over at Palestine Bookshelf in the next 2-3 minutes. And please feel free to, if you'd like to learn more about the Nakba and what has happened to the Palestinians since 1917 and after, please join us on that channel. If not, obviously, welcome more questions, more comments here on Oklahoma City. If you have resources that any of us could benefit from, please put them in the comments so that we can access them. Mo, you had to. I guess you have to spell out this name so that I don't know. So I won't say it. So the YouTube all seeing eye will not get us, but people can read it in the display there. I don't know, Mo. Again, if you could put a link to that, I could learn, but I don't know about his take on it. I won't mention the name. Uncanny. Oh, thank you. The all the work on Palestine, it came to sort of just take over the channel, so I had to create a different channel to just do that. There's still a lot of book reviews on this channel, but that's how the project started. So there's a year's worth of Palestinian book reviews on the Stephen Heiner main channel. But if you want ongoing, completely dedicated, all Palestine 24/7, Palestine Bookshelf is where you want to subscribe. Okay. Thank you, everybody. As I said, I've got to hop over, start the other stream. If you'd like to hear more about what's going on with the Palestinians, particularly regarding the Nakba, just head over to Palestine Bookshelf. I'll be over there in a minute or two. For the rest of you, thank you for joining today's stream, asking questions, sharing resources. It's appreciated. Thank you.